everyone, and welcome to our 1 year YouTube anniversary. I thought it would be fun to do something a little bit different today and to allow you all to get to know my mom a little bit better. She has a very interesting life, and I just wanted her to share some of her background and a little bit of her life story today in honor of our 1 year anniversary on YouTube. So I'm going to turn it over to her to share with you her life.
All right. I feel like for the last year we've been becoming acquainted. I wish I could get to know all of you personally, but Christy has asked me to tell you some things about my life, and so I'm going to do that. It's a interesting background that I have. My parents, my dad was a chaplain at the end of World War II, and when he came out of the Navy, when the war was over, he took an associate pastorship in California and met my mom. He had sponsored a get-together for having some kind of a combined youth event, and she was one of the ones from her church that came, and then he went to his landlord after that day and says, "I met my future wife." So she made quite an impression on him, but she was a wonderful, wonderful woman. And so they had there was a big veterans housing project, barracks, two-story barracks, small apartments, and there were about 6,000 people living there because you have all those servicemen coming back from war, and they need to find a home and they need to find a job. So they were crammed into this housing project. My mother had a friend from high school there, and she went to visit her and came away feeling so sorry for her and the living conditions there. But they were approached by some Christian business people to ask them if they would consider living there, and these Christian business people would gladly help with their expenses. So they moved there with my sister, who's a year older than I am, and then I was born soon after they moved there, and then my brother came 3 years later. And so they were there 6 years ministering to the people, doing church services, starting a youth program, visiting, counseling, winning people to the Lord. And so that was the beginning of my life, just seeing all of that happening around me and the joy that my parents had, and reaching out to all these needs, even though it wasn't the ideal situation. One of the things I wanted to highlight about those early years is, how my dad and mom met, and that verse, "Who can find a virtuous woman? For her price is far above rubies." My mother was truly a virtuous woman. She was joyful, beautiful, energetic, ministry-minded, and humble, never trying to get things for herself, but always just finding joy and serving others. What a team they made. And so that was an important thing for my brother and sister and I, to have that example. And so while we were there, the polio was going around, and a babysitter that I had there, she caught it, and I came down with polio. And so that was, to me, it was just a few months old when I got it, so that was just life as normal. And later I had 2 series of surgeries that did some little turning back some of the damage, but God is faithful. Many of you might have health problems and things that you kind of feel like are holding you back from all the things you'd like to do, but just know that God has a plan for you, and He can use you, and He can, the Bible says those things, when we are weak, we can show His strength. So I encourage you along that line. Then after all of those people moved on in their lives, were able to get jobs and were able to get housing, my parents were there close to the very end, wanted to minister to the people that were still in the housing project. And the youth program they had started was so impactful that there were many that really wanted them to continue that. Mrs. Kerr of the Kerr Glass Company was one of those people, and she found a property and put the down payment on it in Northridge. And so that was where I grew up from 6 until college, and that was very busy place. They had all day long, they had youth programs for children on Saturdays, and then Saturday night high school group, and Friday night a junior high group, and we had other meetings on each night of the week. I think we only had Monday nights when we were not having meetings. So, but the home that we lived in there at the property was primarily a ministry place, so we had our bedrooms and a little kitchen area, but it was very much, we had the joy of seeing very many teens impacted for Christ. My dad's theme was teaching youth through youth, and really strong high schoolers with the assistance of junior high schoolers that had proven character and loved the Lord. They would be leading the children's clubs on Saturday under my parents' supervision. So that was, children were often looking at teens and wanting to model them. And when you can have good role models, that's a wonderful thing. I don't know how many were impacted, but through the years, they were there for 44 years. There were thousands of people impacted by their life. They ended up having a summer camp all summer long. My dad would take the teens out of the city and camping up in the high Sierras and teaching them how to enjoy God's creation, and just all those things were happening. My mom was back at the ranch and keeping everything going and making the payments and overseeing everything. And they ended up also having an after-school care and a summer day camp. And so there was always a lot of activity. My mom didn't have a washer and dryer until we were grown, and pulled some money together to pay for one. So on Saturday nights when the high school group was going on, she would go to the laundromat and with a bunch of quarters, and we would start probably 12 to 15 washing machines. And while they were going, she would go and do the grocery shopping for the week, and then we would put the things in the dryer and then fold them. So we didn't have much, but we were happy, we were joyful. Some of the churches that supported my folks' ministry would give us used clothing bags, and that was like Christmas to us when that happened. They ended up putting in a swimming pool. They had corrals for horses. So it was quite an eventful childhood, but my parents were happy, joyful, and I never heard them argue. So that was a real blessing to grow up in that environment. Now, the things I learned there is how you take everything to the Lord in prayer. It was a faith ministry, and be content at all times. So that was important in my training. And I was back at college. I was in college by this time, pursuing an education degree on the East Coast, a Christian college. My brother brought home his biology textbook from high school, and he said, "Dad, you've got to look at this. They're talking about evolution as if it's a proven fact." And my dad stayed up all night and looked at that, and since he was so wanting to help teens be solid in their faith, he realized how much that would affect them if they felt like science proved that evolution was true and there was no God. So he went back to school. He still ran the place there on the ranch, but he went to UCLA, and he got microbiology degree, and he also got another degree before that. So he ended up with 5 different degrees. And then he wrote a book, Evolution Possible or Impossible. And it had an impact. It was one of the early powerful books that showed that evolution was impossible. So that was, I was away at college, but I know that my dad was working very hard on all of that. And it taught me that we need to do whatever we can do to combat the lies that the world is throwing at young people, and to help them grow strong in faith. After I graduated, I started teaching in a Christian school in the state of Maryland. It was a wonderful Christian school. Just the man that started it had started several Christian schools, and he had a lot of wisdom with children. So that was a great place for me to start teaching. And after teaching in Maryland a couple years, I moved back to California and taught in a Christian school in that area. And that's where I met my husband, my future husband. Yeah, I'm kind of embarrassed to say, but the first thing I ever said to him after he introduced himself, I said, "You're not Fred Rose," because there was another Fred Rose that was in that church that was a little younger than me, and he, when I was visiting that church, and so I just felt like he was pulling my leg. But he was a seminary student and going to graduate school after seminary, and so we started dating. He became the college career group president, and I was the social secretary, so that gave us a lot of time to talk and plan events. And it was just a wonderful, wonderful way to get acquainted. I have no regrets about our dating and engagement, and what a blessing that is. You know, there are a lot of temptations in this world, and a lot of things that make it sound like it's okay to do, be loose about your standards, but it's a wonderful thing to have no regrets when you go into marriage. You know, I was, when I got married, I was 26 and a half, and the first 6 months, my husband was going around doing pulpit supply and candidating, and then a church in Danville, California called him as their pastor. So that put me in a new role as a pastor's wife, and you probably could look back at one of our sessions where I described some of that, and it was a joy to serve with my husband in that capacity, and you know, it was just a blessing to serve people and be able to encourage and bless the people in the congregation and the ladies in the community. And so while we were there, we had only been there a few months when I became pregnant, and we were real excited. We hadn't told anybody yet. And you know, that pregnancy ended in the 3rd month in a miscarriage. And it really helped me to understand how hard that is emotionally and physically. And I went to a women's conference in the Bay Area at that time, and they were talking about, you know, just really submitting your life to the Lord, whatever His plan for you. I had always wanted children. I'd wanted to have a big family. And so I came home, and on my knees I said, "Lord, you know how much I love children and would love to be a mother. But if you can use Fred and I better without having children, Lord, I submit that myself to you, and will accept that as your good and acceptable and perfect will." You know, that was an important step for me, to really be able to take a key area that meant so much to me and know that God knows best. So if there's areas in your life that you're holding on to, and just realize that God does know the future, and He knows what's best, and we can trust Him. Then my husband, we moved down back closer to the church that he had been attending, and we he was doing some special training on raising up leadership in a church, and I had three little ones. I had a newborn and a 1-year-old and a 3.5-year-old, and so it was a busy time. My husband was working two jobs while doing this training, and so I understood that this was a time where focusing on the children and trusting God for energy for each day. And God helped me get the house organized before the third one came, and that was important. And it's important. And what things I learned at that time was how much, the Bible says, train up a child in the way he should go, and how important that early training is. Don't feel bad about having a focus on really doing a good job as a mother. Don't leave your husband and on the sidelines, but know that those early years set a pattern, and so that's very important. Then let me see, I was after that we went to Santa Barbara, and my husband pastored a church there, made many great friends that we continue with. And then we moved to the ranch, my folks' ranch. They had asked us if we would come there and start a program for homeschoolers. We had started homeschooling, and God led us in a very unexpected but specific way. And we knew that homeschoolers need encouragement and help. So we started what is called an ISP school, an independent study program school. And so we had 2 park days a week where people could come and mothers could share ideas, and we had field trips and a library. We had a credentialed teacher that we had met in Santa Barbara area, and she came to live with us, and it was very helpful for me because I was able to focus on the children. We had 4 more children while we were living there, and we actually started the school when the month that Christy was born, so I kind of felt like I gave 2 births at that when we started the school, and we had the school there for 10 years, and it was a real blessing to encourage the people. And once a month I would have a Saturday morning, we call it Mother's Morning Out, and we encourage the fathers to let the mothers come and try to give them real practical encouragement and support. So that was a blessing too, to get to know these mothers better. And after that, things were kind of in a whirl. We moved up to the mountain area. My husband pastored a church up there. And before that, I wanted to not leave out this. While we were at the ranch, my husband came in one time and said, what would you think about a news crew coming tomorrow and doing a story on our family and our homeschooling? And I was expecting baby number 4. We hadn't told anybody yet. And I said, I don't think I've ever said anything like this before or after to my husband, but I says, over my dead body, because I wasn't feeling the best at that time. And anyway, they came the next day, CNN, and they stayed for 2.5 hours, and they did pictures of me reading biographies to the children, and the children working at their desks, and then they interviewed each of the children. And so that was pretty interesting event. And it was one of the people that kind of closed up the report on the CNN side said, she guessed the proof would be in the pudding. So I have a clip of that CNN report. So that I was thinking one time we should let them know about the proof, that how the pudding came out. Anyway, after that, we moved up to the mountain area where Fred was called as a pastor, and so that was a new adventure. And we were involved with children's ministries. We started a big children's ministry that went for both semesters of the school year for 18 years. And so that was a real blessing for the community. They didn't have much like that for the children. And we also had it was during that time we kind of capped off our 22 years of raising teenagers from our oldest down to the youngest. It added up to 22 years, and so that was a big thing. We launched them into college. Matthew went through the Navy SEAL training, and so he ended up in Iraq and Bosnia, different places like that. And we had 7 homeschool graduations. When I graduated from high school, there were 1,000 in the graduation class. And all you had is that they would be reading off the names, and you just kind of walk past the principal and he'd hand you something. And it was very not meaningful, really. But if you've ever been to a homeschool graduation, we had them where the children could do something like a musical number, make a speech, or do some other demonstration of skills. They each had tables where they put samples of their writing and work, and photo pictures, stand-up things that they could. So everybody got to really know and rejoice and celebrate those children. And we opened it up to other children that were homeschooled, and so there was always lots of camaraderie and fun. We had the caps and gowns and a stage and a speaker. So that was a fun time of life to be launching our homeschool graduates into college and life. After our 27 years of homeschooling, Fred retired and worked various jobs to pay the bills, and I was caring for my godly mother who needed care at that time, and she lived on the same property with us. And also an unexpected event happened just a couple of years ago. My husband loved to do these prayer hikes. He was so strong and healthy. He was at the gym 3 times a week, and just was very, very health conscious. And the 5 sons that we had were always trying to keep up with him. And I was coming back from grocery shopping and down in the valley, and he says, well, he was going on a prayer hike. So when I got home, he said he was taking the dog. The dog was outside the house, but I couldn't find Fred anywhere. And I figured he had lost cell contact up on the mountains behind our home. And at that time, Matt, our oldest, who had been a SEAL, he arrived and he knew the trail, so he went up looking for him and found him. And the coroner reports confirmed what Matt found. My husband was standing in a field of wildflowers, looking across the freeway at these just neon poppy fields lit up by the sun, and then his heart just stopped, and the coroner said it was painless. It was instant and painless. So he was talking to the Lord, and then all of a sudden was in the Lord's presence. Well, Christy and Nathan, 2 of our children, were visiting their sister, Michelle, and her husband, Carlin, who is a missionary doctor. They were in Central Africa at the time. And I thought what a kind thing that was for God to have siblings there with Michelle when the news came. So they quickly got on flights to come home, and you know, my life took on a new role now as trusting God as a widow. And our sons helped us pack things up in the property up there and put a lot of things in storage, and found a rental house for us. And so we are living in the valley here, and it's closer to the church, and we're involved in. And so God is just helping us. You know, all the lessons, you've heard about our answer to prayer box and all the lessons of growing up. I know that God is in control, and I can trust Him, and I can be content in whatever state I am. So now, as a widow, the privilege of trusting God at this stage of life and for the future is something that is not hard to do, because we have a faithful God who has proved Himself over and over. Now, when I when I was planning this talk, I realized that there were so many of you that have not had the kind of upbringing, the kind of examples, the kind of godly parents that I did. And so I wanted to let you know that not to feel sad or deprived, but be motivated. You can start a new generation in your family line. You can really take to heart what the Bible says in Titus 2 for women, and find older women that can encourage you along this line. You know, God wants to make a new trajectory in your family line, and by trusting Him, you can be the catalyst for that. And I read this in one other earlier one of our sessions, but this is what Titus 2, 3 through 5 means to for your children. Mamas, be good examples of a good life, a right life, so that your children may see that you are sound-minded, that you love their daddy, that you love them, that you are wise and self-controlled, that you are pure in thought and deed, that you love the home they live in, that you want to be there, take care of it, and make it safe for them, that you are kind, that you treat their daddy as the head of the home, so that they see truth, so that they see the example of what is right, and they trust God and His Word.
Okay, thank you again for tuning in and sticking with us for a full year. And we're looking forward to keeping the episodes coming this coming year. But as always, we would love ideas for topics. If there's something that you want wisdom on, just comment below the video or send us a Instagram message, and that always helps us to know what lessons to plan for. And so so we'll look forward to keeping those coming this year. So thank you again. Have a wonderful week.
And have a wonderful rest of the year.
Bye.
Bye.